See, you don't quit it, and you don't quit in sports. You retire. You don't get to quit. It's not an option. See, someone told me that a long time ago. That ain't even an option. And the person told me that, he ain't here anymore. He died. This is what's great about sports. This is what the greatest thing about sports is. You play to win the game. Hello? You play to win the game. You don't play to just play it. That's the great thing about sports. You play to win. And I don't care if you don't have any wins. You go play to win. When you start telling me it doesn't matter, then retire. Get out.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Randall Handles Football Podcast. I'm your host, Randall Tievas. So this week starts the beginning of all the real fun in the National Football League. That's right, the playoffs have officially started, and we have what we call Super Wildcard Weekend. What used to just be called Wildcard Weekend is now Super Wildcard Weekend, as we have triple headers on both Saturday and Sunday. Due to the expansion of the playoffs, we now have 7 playoff teams from each conference, and as a result, 3 games coming from each of the conferences. So over in the AFC, we have the number 2 seeded team playing the number 7 seed, the number 3 seeded team playing the number 6 seeded team, and the number 4 seeded team playing the number 5 seeded team. And in addition to that, the number 1 seeded team gets the first round bye. Of course, it's going to be the same thing in the NFC as well, and the slight difference from last year and all the previous years compared to this year is there's now just 1 team getting a first round bye instead of 2 teams getting the first round bye. So before we get into all the fun and excitement for this week, we can start by reviewing the previous week, Week 17 in the NFL season. So Week 17 definitely saw some drama. There was a lot of playoff implications on the line. Overall, for my picks, I correctly picked 11 games and incorrectly picked 5 games for a record of 11-5 last week. My 5 incorrect picks were Philadelphia Eagles beating the Washington football team, which I'll get into that in just a little bit. The Dallas Cowboys beating the New York Giants. The Miami Dolphins beating the Buffalo Bills. The Arizona Cardinals beating the Los Angeles Rams. And lastly, the Denver Broncos beating the Las Vegas Raiders. So among my correct picks were my lock of the week, the Indianapolis Colts beating the Jacksonville Jaguars. And my upset of the week was the Denver Broncos beating the Las Vegas Raiders, which did not happen as I just mentioned. So starting out with the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Indianapolis Colts, this really wasn't much of a contest. It never figured to be much of a contest. No matter what happened this game, Jacksonville Jaguars were locked into the number 1 pick and for the best chances to draft quarterback Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence just yesterday did announce that he is coming out in the NFL draft, so he will be available for the Jaguars to select. With the Colts' win and the Dolphins' loss, the Indianapolis Colts did officially clinch a playoff spot, and they did secure the number 7 seed in the playoffs. And like I said, the Jaguars, no matter what happened, win or lose, they were going to get the number 1 pick in the NFL draft. They have now lost 15 straight games. And so, like I said, more than likely, the Jaguars will be selecting Trevor Lawrence with the number 1 pick in this coming NFL draft. The next game saw the Tennessee Titans going into Houston to take on the Texans. This one had a chance to be an upset. I almost selected the Houston Texans to be my upset of the week, but I just believed a little bit too much in Tennessee. And well, it took a game-winning field goal as time expired for the Tennessee Titans to beat the Houston Texans. Listen, as much flack as the Houston Texans have gotten, of course they fired their coach/GM, Bill O'Brien, I think 6 games into the season. Even with all this drama and what happened in their offseason trading away DeAndre Hopkins, Deshaun Watson quietly put up the best season of his entire career. He led the league in passing yards. He was top 5 in touchdowns. He was number 1 in completion percentage. Deshaun Watson is the real deal. He is legit. It'll be up to Houston to surround Deshaun Watson with more talent and really, don't waste away his talent. that Deshaun Watson is, the talent that the Houston Texans have. So I'm excited for Houston moving forward. They definitely do have their franchise quarterback. With Tennessee's win over Houston, they did officially clinch the AFC South title. If they would have lost and Indianapolis would have won, Indianapolis would have clinched the AFC South title, and they instead would have been hosting a playoff game. But as it turned out, all Tennessee needed to do was just win the game, and they had the AFC South crown, and of course that did happen as well. The next matchup saw the Atlanta Falcons going into Tampa to take on the Buccaneers. Not much to be said here. Tampa Bay won the game. They won it pretty handily. I think Tom Brady ended up putting up 4 or 5 touchdown passes this game. The unfortunate thing was, as Tampa Bay did play their starters, Mike Evans did go down with an injury, and his status for this coming weekend is up in the air. But even so, you got to realize the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have a lot of firepower. Even if Mike Evans did not go, they still have Antonio Brown and Chris Godwin on the outside. In the slot, they still have Scotty Miller. And of course, they have their triple-headed monster of tight ends, Rob Gronkowski, O.J. Howard, and Cameron Brate. And that's not to mention in the backfield, they still have the GOAT Tom Brady. They still have Leonard Fournette and Ronald Jones. So even if Mike Evans isn't able to go, I know he is Tom Brady's favorite target. They still do have plenty of options, so I wouldn't be too worried about that. There really wasn't much for Tampa Bay to play for. They already had their playoff spot locked in. Bruce Arians just said that he wanted to keep his players. They didn't want to rest them, and with the potential of coming out flat in their playoff game. So they did play their starters, and they won that game pretty handily. The next matchup saw the Dallas Cowboys going into New York to take on the Giants. Now, this game did have playoff implications, as neither of these teams were officially eliminated going into Week 17. The winner of this game needed the Philadelphia Eagles to beat the Washington football team, and they would have been awarded the NFC East division winners. So if it would have been Dallas winning this game and Washington losing, Dallas would have been the winner in this division with a record of 7 wins and 9 losses. With New York Giants winning, they finished the season 6-10. And if Washington would have lost to Philadelphia, the New York Giants would have been the division winners at a record of 6 wins and 10 losses. Imagine that. That would have been pretty crazy. But as it turned out, like I mentioned before, Washington did beat Philadelphia in a very controversial game. And so we didn't actually have a 6-win team making the playoffs. I think Dallas was was definitely a disappointment this entire season. But even in this game, with the chance to go to the playoffs, they really blew it, and they had a really listless showing against the New York Giants. Give the credit to the New York Giants. They played tough defense. Daniel Jones did enough to win the game. So if you're the Giants, again, you need another good offseason, and you could really be a contender. Of course, if you're Dallas, all you need to do is just make sure Dak Prescott is healthy and that you actually lock him up into a contract. Because remember, Dak Prescott was given the franchise tag last season. So again, this was a prove-it year for him. He got hurt, I think it was in the 4th game of the season. And what ended up happening was the Dallas Cowboys pretty much sucked the entire season and showed that they do need Dak Prescott leading them to be a real contender. So even though Dak Prescott did not play for most of this season, he showed how valuable he is to this team. And if you ask me, his value, his stock just rose even though he didn't play this season. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Dallas. They can't give him the franchise tag. His franchise tag would be worth something in the neighborhood of like $50 million. So it'll be interesting to see what happens down in Texas. The next matchup, again, there was no playoff implications here, was the New York Jets going into New England to take on the Patriots. The Jets were riding a 2-game winning streak, looking to make it 3 straight against the New England Patriots. The Patriots have dominated the New York Jets over the past 2 decades or so. And the same thing happened. New England won that game pretty handily. That might have been Cam Newton's final game starting in Foxborough, almost assuredly, but it might have also been his final game as a starting quarterback in the NFL. Imagine that. So again, not much to say here. The New England Patriots did beat the New York Jets. The next matchup was the Los Angeles Chargers going into Kansas City to take on the Chiefs. Even though the Kansas City decided to rest their starters, if you remember way back in Week 2, when these two teams first played each other and Justin Herbert was making his first career start, the Los Angeles Chargers nearly knocked off the Kansas City Chiefs. It took in overtime a field goal by Harrison Butker of the Kansas City Chiefs to even win that game. And, Los Angeles had a chance to win the game as they were around midfield, had a 4th-and-1 chance, and they decided not to go for it. Instead, punted the ball away. And Mahomes, of course, led his team on the game-winning drive to kick a field goal and win the game. So even if Kansas City would have played its starters, this would have been an interesting game. But with Kansas City resting their starters because they were locked into the number 1 seed in the AFC and a first-round bye, it really didn't do you any good to play your starters. And so Andy Reid decided to give his players a 2-week rest. So with that being said, Los Angeles Chargers going up against the number 2s of Kansas City, it was going to be a no contest. And Los Angeles did win that game pretty handedly. And so they go into the offseason, I think, winning 4 straight, 5 of their last 6 games. So they have a lot of momentum going into the offseason. So it'll be an interesting offseason for the Los Angeles Chargers, as again they look to try to solidify their offense, give Justin Herbert some more talent around him, especially on the offensive line. The next matchup, again, had no playoff implications, but did have pride at stake. We had the Minnesota Vikings going into Detroit to take on the Lions. This was definitely an exciting game. Minnesota pulled the game out by 2. It was really a back-and-forth game the entire game. I think the final score ended up being like 35-33, so it's definitely a high-scoring game. Very exciting game. This may have proved to be Matt Stafford's last game in Detroit. I talked about it with the Houston Texans, as they don't want to waste away that talent that Deshaun Watson is on their team. It really seemed like the same thing, that's exactly what happened with the Detroit Lions. When Matthew Stafford came out of college from Georgia and was selected by the Detroit Lions number 1, he was a terrific prospect. His first couple of seasons were injury-plagued, but he was a terrific talent. He had all the arm strength in the world. He was a little bit mobile. He could do everything, make every throw. He's been a great talent. And what has Detroit done with that talent? They still never won a single NFC North title crown, even when they had Calvin Johnson and Matt Stafford on the same team. They did have a couple of wildcard berths, still never won a playoff game. And it just seems like I said, Detroit just wasted away, the last 10 years of, of their team, of Matt Stafford's career, and never did enough to really put that team over the top, when really they could have been, as they had an elite quarterback. In which I would like to talk about that in a little bit too. So, anyways, there wasn't any playoff implications here. The Minnesota Vikings did beat the Detroit Lions. Definitely a big disappointment for the Vikings this season, as they had been to the playoffs. I think it was like the previous 3 years. So, not going to the playoffs this year. The next matchup was a bit of a preview of what's to come in Super Wildcard Weekend, as the Pittsburgh Steelers went into Cleveland to take on the Browns. The only difference was Ben Roethlisberger wasn't playing that game against Cleveland, but he will be playing this weekend against the Cleveland Browns. So with that being said, Mason Rudolph did get the start for Pittsburgh, and they made it very competitive, right? They had a chance to win the game at the very end. I think they came a 2-point conversion short of winning the game, but Cleveland did win the game, and they did clinch their playoff spot. Again, they were in another example where they had to win in order to secure their playoff spot, and they did get the job done. They did just enough to win that game. And so, like I mentioned before, they will be playing Pittsburgh again this weekend in the playoffs. The next matchup, again, another battle of AFC North opponents, as the Baltimore Ravens went into Cincinnati to take on the Bengals. This one was a no contest from the very beginning. Baltimore absolutely blew out and obliterated the Cincinnati Bengals. Again, another example where Baltimore had to win in order to secure their playoff spot. They did get the job done, as I mentioned. But either way, even with the Miami Dolphins losing, and all these other playoff teams that were on the bubble winning, it really didn't really matter too much. But like I said, Baltimore did get the job done. They did secure their playoff spot. They will be going into Tennessee, a rematch of last year's divisional round matchup, to take on the Titans. So that'll be an interesting one. Our next matchup, NFC North opponents, Green Bay Packers and Chicago Bears. Chicago had to win this game in order to clinch their playoff spot, but they also could have made the playoffs if they lost and Arizona lost the game. So going into this matchup, they did hold the number 7 seed, and all they at least needed was Arizona to lose the game against the Los Angeles Rams to ensure they made the playoffs. And the Chicago Bears did lose to the Green Bay Packers, but the Arizona Cardinals also lost to the Los Angeles Rams. So Chicago was able to punch its ticket into the playoffs. As an 8-8 team, do I really think that they should be a playoff team? No, not really. And this is part of the problem with expanding the playoffs to 7 teams. It's kind of interesting. Over in the NFC, you have an 8-8 team making it into the wild card with the Chicago Bears. You have a 9-7 team with the Los Angeles Rams making it to the playoff team. Neither one of those records are really impressive, right? And it almost seems like, it was pointless to have expanded the playoffs. But over in the AFC, we had all 3 wildcard teams, the Baltimore Ravens, the Cleveland Browns, and the Indianapolis Colts, all were 11-win teams. Had the playoffs not been expanded, we would have had an 11-win team not making it to the playoffs. And already the Miami Dolphins finished with 10 wins as well in the AFC, and they are not going to the playoffs. So it seems this year that the AFC is a lot stronger of a conference than the NFC, and so it makes sense in the AFC's perspective to have expanded the playoffs. It's kind of a best of both worlds. You're going to get some bad teams making it to playoffs as a wildcard team, but you're also going to get more good teams making it to the playoffs. So it's kind of interesting what happened there. Our next matchup saw the New Orleans Saints going into Carolina to take on the Panthers. No Michael Thomas, no Alvin Kamara, no Latavius Murray, no problem for the New Orleans Saints. New Orleans Saints took care of business against the Carolina Panthers, and as a result, they did hold on to the number 2 seed in the playoffs, and so they will be hosting the number 7 seeded Chicago Bears in the playoffs. That was what their playoff implications were. Had the New Orleans Saints won and the Green Bay Packers lost, then New Orleans would have been the number 1 seed, and they would have had that first round bye. So there was, some seeding to worth it to for this past weekend in the NFC side as well. Our next matchup was the Miami Dolphins going into Buffalo to take on the Bills. Miami Dolphins. What a shame. What a shame. You guys played a good season. You guys had a great defense all season long. And then, for whatever reason, Week 17, you guys blew it big time. With a chance to go to the playoffs with everything on the line, y'all did not show up. You allowed the Buffalo Bills to drop 56 points on you guys. Wow. And, you might say, okay, well, Josh Allen's a terrific quarterback, blah, 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 blah. He didn't even play in the second half. Going into halftime, the score was 28-3. It was already a game over, right? But even with Matt Barkley taking over at quarterback, you still allowed the Buffalo Bills to score another 4 touchdowns on you guys and really drop that 50 burger on you guys. Such a disappointment. So sad, when everyone thought that the Dolphins were, almost a shoo-in for the playoffs. They didn't get the job done. And as a result, they will be watching the playoffs from their couches. From the Buffalo Bills perspective, hey, you had a great showing. A lot of momentum going into the playoffs this weekend. You have to feel real good about yourself. You have an MVP candidate in Josh Allen. You will be hosting the number 7 seeded, the worst wildcard team this coming weekend. So hey, there's a lot of excitement there. Going into the afternoon games from those Sunday matchups, we had the Seattle Seahawks going into San Francisco to take on the 49ers. I say going into San Francisco, but again, the 49ers were hosting their games in Arizona at State Farm Stadium, or whatever it's called, in Glendale. San Francisco was looking to play spoiler, right? Had Seattle lost, Seattle already had their playoffs, their NFC West division crown locked up. What they were trying to do was ensure that Seattle wasn't going to get the number 1 seed. Again, didn't really matter here. San Francisco was winning this game 16-6 with 10 minutes left in the fourth quarter. And then the explosion came. Seattle scored 20 unanswered points to take the lead 26-16, just for San Francisco to come back and score a last-second touchdown to make it somewhat close, to make the final score 26-23. San Francisco dominated that game, dominated this matchup all game long up until the fourth quarter when Russell Wilson finally started cooking. I think that this may have exposed some weaknesses with Seattle, especially as they take on the Los Angeles Rams. Not so much. I think they exposed some weaknesses with the Seahawks. But either way, when it came down to it, the Seattle was able to get the job done. They still have one of the best quarterbacks in the entire NFL in Russell Wilson. And so they were able to get the job done. Arizona Cardinals going into Los Angeles to take on the Rams. This was supposed to be Kyler Murray's clinching the playoffs, clinching the playoffs for the first time in 5 or 6 years for the Cardinals. But what happens on the first or second drive of the game? He gets injured, rolls up his ankle, and he leaves for the entire first half. So this became a battle of backup quarterbacks. Kyler Murray did return to the game after halftime, and really didn't do much. They ended up losing the game, I think it was 18-7. And so that shows you that even when Kyler Murray came back, he wasn't healthy. He shouldn't have been playing out there. And, well, he wasn't even good enough to even score one touchdown. And so Los Angeles did win the game. They had officially eliminated the Arizona Cardinals' chances from making the playoffs, especially after Chicago did lose that game to Green Bay. And as a result, the Los Angeles Rams did lock into the number 6 seed going into the playoffs. Our last matchup from Sunday afternoon was the Las Vegas Raiders going into Denver to take on the Broncos. This took a last-second touchdown drive by the Las Vegas Raiders and Derek Carr to potentially tie the game. But instead of kicking the extra point to tie the game, they went for the 2-point conversion in the last second to actually win the game. And wouldn't you know it, they did convert that 2-point conversion, and they did beat the Denver Broncos 32-31. Like I said, Denver was my upset pick of the week, and it took a 2-point conversion in the last second for them not to be my upset of the week. So it is what it is. I still feel good about that pick. All right, this brings us into the final matchup for Week 17, the Sunday night matchup between the Washington football team and the Philadelphia Eagles. Eagles, what the hell are you guys doing? There's this unwritten rule that, you don't purposely make it look like you're tanking for a game. You go out there and try to win every single game. As Herm Edwards once said, very famously, you play to win the game. But obviously you guys weren't playing to win the game. You had a lead in the game. You had a lot of momentum. Jalen Hurts wasn't playing his best game, but he was doing enough to lead them. I think they had the lead 17-14 when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you pull Jalen Hurts out of the game. The next 2 drives, interception and fumble by Nate Sudfeld, and you lose the game. What the hell are you guys doing? That was an absolutely disgrace. You showed that you really don't care. You ruin the integrity of the game by doing things like that. You don't do things like that. All right, there's my rant. So, Philadelphia did lose the game, which ensured when Washington won the game that they did have the NFC crown. Like I said, had Philadelphia actually won the game with Washington losing, the New York Giants would have been the division winners. And I think that would have made for, great conversations, excellent TV as a 6-10 team was hosting a playoff game. But like I said, Philadelphia inexplicably just decided to tank just to ensure that they had, I think, the number 3 pick and number 4 pick in the NFL draft. Some stupid shit like that. So it is what it is. So those were all the matchups from the Week 17, the final week in the NFL season. Now, like I said, this week I was 11 correct, 5 incorrect picks. As a total for the entire season, I had 166 correct picks, 88 incorrect picks, and of course there was the one tie between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Cincinnati Bengals. So again, 166 correct, 88 incorrect, and 1 tie. That's good for a record this season of 654. So I correctly picked about 2/3 of the games and incorrectly picked 1/3 of the games. That's not too bad. If you're a gambler, hey, you definitely live with winning 2/3 of the time. That's you playing with house money and you're winning every time. So now going into this Super Wildcard weekend matchups. Well, first off, on the AFC side, the number 1 seed is the Kansas City Chiefs, and they have their first round bye. The number 2 seed is the Buffalo Bills. The number 3 seed is the Pittsburgh Steelers. The number 4 seed is the Tennessee Titans. Those 1 through 4 teams are all division winners, and the next 3 teams are all wildcard teams. Number 5, the Baltimore Ravens. Number 6, Cleveland Browns. Number 7, Indianapolis Colts. And so the way it goes is the highest seeded team plays the lowest seeded team. The next highest plays the next lowest. The next highest plays the next lowest, so on and so forth. So with Kansas City getting their first round bye, the next highest seed is the Buffalo Bills at number 2. They will be playing the lowest seeded number 7 Indianapolis Colts. So that is our first matchup on Saturday morning. The Indianapolis Colts are going into Buffalo to take on the Bills. For this game, I have the Buffalo Bills winning. Like I said, Josh Allen's an MVP candidate. He's probably been the most consistent quarterback all season long, so I'm picking Buffalo. The next highest seed, the number 3 Pittsburgh Steelers, are hosting the next lowest wildcard team, and that is the Cleveland Browns. So going into Sunday, this is the final game on Sunday evening. We have the Cleveland Browns going into Pittsburgh to take on the Steelers. I think it'll be nice and exciting if this is actually a really cold, a wet, maybe a snowy game. If it is, this game definitely favors the Cleveland Browns. Now, I know the Cleveland Browns, there was an outbreak of COVID in their facilities. Their head coach, Stefanowski, will not actually be coaching this game. He has to sit it out. But either way, I think so long as Cleveland does get their run game going, which they were not able to last week, don't get that twisted. If they can get that run game going and the play action pass going, I think Pittsburgh's in a lot of trouble here. But if they're not able to do that and it becomes somewhat of a shootout, like which quarterback is better, definitely I would take Ben Roethlisberger and I'd pick the Pittsburgh Steelers to win. But as it is, I'm picking the Cleveland Browns to upset the Pittsburgh Steelers and get their first playoff win in the past 2 decades. That's right, so I'm picking the Cleveland Browns to beat the Pittsburgh Steelers. Our last matchup in the AFC is the number 4 seeded Tennessee Titans taking on the number 5 seeded Baltimore Ravens. So our first matchup on Sunday morning, has the Baltimore Ravens going into Tennessee to take on the Titans. This is a rematch of the divisional round last season, when the roles were reversed. Baltimore was instead hosting the Tennessee Titans, and Tennessee was able to dominate the Baltimore Ravens. They won that game 28-12, and Derrick Henry ran wild. I don't think it's going to be as dramatic. I think this is actually going to be a terrific game. Baltimore's probably been the hottest team coming into the playoffs, as they had to pretty much win out the rest of their games just to make it to the playoffs, in which they did. Lamar Jackson's been playing terrific, running the ball and throwing the ball. However, they just have King Henry, the absolute beast, the best running back in the entire league. I'm picking the Tennessee Titans to beat the Baltimore Ravens here in this playoff matchup, so Tennessee does advance to the next round. Over on the NFC side, we have the team that has the first round bye, the number 1 seed Green Bay Packers. The number 2 seed is going to be the New Orleans Saints. The number 3 seed, the Seattle Seahawks. And number 4, Washington Football Team. Again, all 4 of those teams are all division winners, and they all will be hosting at least one playoff game. The 3 wildcard teams, the number 5 seeded Tampa Bay Buccaneers, number 6 Los Angeles Rams, and number 7 Chicago Bears. Again, the number 1 seeded Green Bay Packers do get the first round bye, so it's going to go to the next highest seed, the New Orleans Saints, taking on the lowest seed Chicago Bears. So for a Sunday afternoon matchup, we have the Chicago Bears going into New Orleans to take on the Saints. And listen, I don't think Chicago's a very good team. They were 8-8. They probably didn't even deserve to be in the playoffs, but they're here. So that is something just to be happy about. But I don't think that they can keep up with a healthy New Orleans team, especially with the defense that New Orleans has. I know Chicago bills themselves as a great defensive team, but New Orleans has been one of the best defensive teams all season long. I'm picking the Saints here to win this matchup and advance to the second round. The next highest seed after the New Orleans Saints is the Seattle Seahawks, and they'll be taking on the next lowest seed, the Los Angeles Rams. So our Saturday afternoon game is going to be the Los Angeles Rams going into Seattle to take on the Seahawks. Russell Wilson is 5-0, undefeated, playing at home in the playoffs. And I know that there's not really a 12th man anymore, as the stadium's going to be completely empty. But I don't even think Jared Goff's going to be playing this game for the Los Angeles Rams. And so it would take a hell of a play calling and scheming from Sean McVay's standpoint for the Los Angeles Rams to actually win this game. They're going to definitely have to rely on their defense to slow down Russell Wilson in that offense, much as the San Francisco 49ers did last week against the Seahawks. I think even so, I think Seattle's just overall the better team. Even with Jared Goff playing this game, I would still pick Seattle to win this game. And so I am picking Seattle to win this game and advance to the second round. Our last matchup for Super Wildcard Weekend is the number 4 seeded Washington Football Team hosting the number 5 seeded Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now this game has upset written all over it, as Washington has the number 1 defense in the entire league, led by their dominant pass rush with Chase Young. However, I think that their offense just isn't quite up to par. Ron Rivera said he might be platooning his quarterbacks. He might just be changing quarterbacks in and out, in and out, in and out. And by the way, Tampa Bay's defense is not too bad itself. So I think that Tampa Bay here is the better team, definitely on offense. And hey, on defense, they're not bad at either. They'll be able to slow down Washington and do enough to win this game. I'm picking the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to win this matchup. So again, just to review all these matchups for a Super Wildcard Weekend. First off, the Indianapolis Colts and the Buffalo Bills. I'm taking the Bills to win this game. The Los Angeles Rams going into Seattle to take on the Seahawks. I'm taking the Seahawks. And the Tampa Bay going into Washington to take on the football team. I'm picking the Buccaneers there. On our Sunday matchups, we have the Baltimore Ravens going into Tennessee to take on the Titans. I have the Titans winning that game. The Chicago Bears going into New Orleans to take on the Saints. I have the Saints winning that game. And lastly, the Cleveland Browns going into Pittsburgh. I have Cleveland winning that game and getting their first win in the past 2 decades in the playoffs. So let me know what you guys think and what your playoff picks are for this coming weekend. It's going to be an exciting one. I'm very excited. Who doesn't love playoff football? This has been another episode of the Randall Handles Football Podcast. Thank you all for listening.
I don't care who you play, whether it's a high school team, a junior college team, a college team, much less an NFL team. When you turn the ball over 5 times, 4 interceptions, 1 for a touchdown, 3 others in field position to set up touchdowns, you ain't gonna beat anybody I just talked about. Anybody. All right? And that was a disgraceful performance, in my opinion. We threw that game. We gave it away by doing that. We gave them the friggin' game. In my opinion, that sucked. What's that? Playoffs? Don't talk about playoffs. You kidding me? Playoffs? I just hope we can win a game.